Hey guys, tonight we begin in the heart of a forested world, surrounded by red earth, birdsong, and something unusually still. You are standing before the ancient walls of Benin City, massive, winding ramparts that seem to hum in the evening heat. No signs, no trumpets, no friendly welcome mat or pamphlet kiosks. Just the faint clink of metal, the smell of ash and earth, and the unmistakable feeling that you're about to enter a place where nothing is ever said out loud unless it absolutely has to be. You're here to discover how the Kingdom of Benin, yes, the one in modern-day Nigeria, not the Republic of Benin next door, created some of the most breathtaking art the world has ever known. Art that didn't just depict power but whispered it, sculpted it, cast it in molten bronze, and handed it down without needing so much as a single spoken word. This isn't your average museum tour. This is a world where entire histories are carved into reliefs, where brass speaks louder than laws, and where artists worked in almost sacred silence. And you, lucky traveler, have a front row seat, so long as you don't ask too many questions. Or rather, any. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk the packed earth path that winds toward the city. Dust clings to your ankles, and the air hangs heavy with a spicy, wood smoke scent. There are sounds in the distance, hollow drumming, maybe, or someone hammering metal, but it's faint, like the city is speaking under its breath. You've heard of the Benin bronzes before, maybe in some debate about museums and who owns what. But here, where the walls stretch beyond the horizon and rise over twice your height, you're not thinking about politics. You're wondering how something this vast got here without scaffolding, concrete, or cranes. Historians still argue whether the walls of Benin, which once stretched over 10,000 miles in length, were more impressive than the Great Wall of China. And no, that's not exaggeration. The Guinness Book of World Records once labeled them the largest earthworks ever built by human hands. Think of a whole city wrapped in a living snake of walls, moats, and embankments, each one carefully packed and reinforced by generations. And you're just trying not to step on a toad the size of your foot. At the city gates, you're greeted not by a person but by carvings, symbols, and icons etched into the entryway itself. A brass leopard's head gleams softly in the torchlight. You see a pair of crocodiles entwined in a spiral, mouths open in a soundless hiss. If these gates had a voice, they wouldn't be shouting welcome. They'd be saying, understand what this place is, or go home. Inside, the noise doesn't increase, it decreases. There are no market hawkers screaming about cassava prices, no children darting between you in a whirlwind of yelling. Instead, you walk into quiet, an organized hum of activity that seems to operate on glances, gestures, and the occasional musical phrase struck on a gong. One small boy runs past with a basket of red clay, looking over his shoulder with a kind of amused suspicion. It's clear, you are very much a visitor here. The ground beneath you is firm and springy, a mixture of trampled soil and compacted fibers from palm fronds and grasses. You almost slip when it turns to polished clay, forming a grand road, or OSA, that leads you deeper into the city's sacred heart. At a bend in the path, you spot it, your first full view of the bronze reliefs. They line the side of a long, low building, gleaming with stories. Not written stories, not scripts. These are tales told through metal, warriors with jagged spears, elephants bowing at a man's feet, a starry pattern trailing from a woman's crown. And here's where it hits you. None of these people are speaking. The figures in the plaques are silent. Their mouths are closed. Their gestures are bold but restrained. It's art that communicates in whispers, a historical record carved for those who knew how to look and how to keep quiet. That silence was no accident. In Benin, especially during the height of the kingdom around the 15th and 16th centuries, the Oba, the king, wasn't just a political figure. He was divine. And when you're divine, you don't talk. You allow others to interpret your silence as they will. The Oba didn't yell orders across courtyards or give long, droning speeches. He sat, motionless, surrounded by symbolism, and when he did speak, it was often through intermediaries. You might think that sounds like a nightmare in group projects, but here, it kept the kingdom functioning like a clock wound by rituals and imagery. Even now, as you pass through the courtyard, you see a group of dignitaries frozen in ceremony. A horn sounds once, sharp and brief. No words follow, but everyone moves. One man removes his coral-beaded hat. Another kneels. A woman lifts a carved ivory baton. All choreography, no talking. It's beautiful. It's eerie. It's oddly relaxing. And the reason this worked, the reason Benin didn't fall into chaos despite the hush, is because everything in this kingdom meant something. Every pattern, every shape, every material had a role. You're looking at a culture that built an entire visual language, with rules and grammar as strict as Latin. You just had to know how to read it. Bronze, for example, wasn't just fancy metal. It was sacred, reserved for the Oba and certain ceremonies. The casting of bronze plaques and statues wasn't considered mere art. It was communication with the ancestors, with history, with the divine. Historians still debate how Benin metalworkers perfected their casting techniques so early, especially considering the sheer detail in each plaque, the muscles on a warrior's arm, the folds in a queen mother's gown, the grin on a very smug-looking goat. Quirkier still, these metalworkers often used Serre Perdue or lost wax casting, a method where a wax sculpture is encased in clay, melted out, and replaced by molten metal. The wax, often sculpted at night, in silence, sometimes to the sound of low, rhythmic drumming. Because nothing says relaxing evening, like building a goat-headed guardian figure in the dark. And you think your hobby of painting miniatures is intense. There's a story, unverified, but delightfully persistent, that one early oboe once banned his guilds from even thinking about new patterns without his blessing, as if creativity itself had to pass through royal approval. Yet the result? A stunning, coherent artistic vocabulary that lasted centuries. Even now, as you lean against a cool stone bench and watch a craftsman polish a curved bronze bracelet, you realize this entire city is a museum where no one explains anything out loud. And yet, you understand. There's something deeply restful about that. The way everything just fits, the way every line leads to another line, every silence deepens rather than dulls. You start to feel the pull of it, like your breath is syncing with the rhythm of the place. A bronze drum thuds 3 times in the distance. Somewhere, a servant folds their arms across their chest and bows. A gust of wind flutters a curtain of polished cowrie shells, and the sound they make. It's like a lullaby composed by metal and sea. You lean your head back, and you let the quiet speak. You follow the gleam of brass deeper into Benin City, and the air changes. Not cooler, not warmer either, but heavier, like it's loaded with the weight of watching eyes and waiting history. The path winds through archways carved with twisting vines and animal faces. Some of the faces look human, though their expressions are exaggerated, theatrical, slightly unnerving, like masks frozen mid-performance. And then, without fanfare, you arrive at the heart of it all, the royal palace. Or rather, the obviously royal palace. It isn't gaudy in the way a European castle might be, no towers screaming, "I'm rich," from miles away. No, the Oba's court is subtle, spacious, symmetrical, and encircled with sculpture and silence. Here, you begin to feel a different sort of rhythm. Not the market bustle or the clatter of blacksmiths. This is the rhythm of control. There are guards, yes, but they don't bark orders. No loud ceremony greets your arrival. Instead, the members of the court move like figures in a slow-motion dance. One elder lifts a staff with coral beads strung around it. Another lifts a fly whisk of horsetail, brushing the air without touching anything. Nobody speaks. And yet, somehow, everything is being said. You've just stepped into the Oba's court, a place where silence is not awkward. It's sacred, strategic, absolutely necessary. See, in the kingdom of Benin, the Oba was more than just a king. He was semi-divine, a living ancestor, a man whose very breath had meaning. And while he could speak, doing so often carried huge weight, politically, spiritually, and emotionally. So he rarely did. The Oba didn't make long speeches. He didn't wave to crowds. Instead, he sat, usually beneath a canopy of intricately woven fabric, surrounded by the symbols of kingship, coral, ivory, leopard skins, and brass ornaments. Courtiers would gather, kneel, present offerings. And if the Oba needed to issue an order, he'd often do it through gestures or through someone else entirely. You might think that sounds inefficient, like trying to run a kingdom by charades. But the effect was the opposite. His silence amplified everything. When the Oba did speak, you'd better believe people listened. It was theater, politics, and spiritual ritual bundled into one very, very calm man. Even now, in your little daydream stroll through the palace, you can feel it, the tension and the quiet, the power behind restraint. It's like watching a master poker player in a room full of amateurs. He doesn't need to show his hand. Everyone folds anyway. Historians still argue whether this strategy of silence was born from traditional spiritual beliefs or whether it was a calculated political move. Probably both. The Yoruba and Edo belief systems surrounding Benin culture emphasized the power of words, but also the danger of misusing them. Words could build. Words could destroy. Best, then, to treat them with caution. So instead of big speeches, the Oba had symbols. Everywhere. His coral bead crown, for example, wasn't just pretty, it was a status announcement. Coral was considered sacred, a living material pulled from the ocean and imbued with divine energy. Wearing it wasn't just fashion. It was a message. I speak for the ancestors. And no, I don't need to explain myself. You pass under a hanging curtain of coral beads now, soft and clinking in the breeze. Beyond it, you spot the royal stool, an object that looks deceptively simple, but has been passed down through generations. The stool, by the way, is not for sitting like you, or I might imagine. It's symbolic. It means the Oba could sit, if he chose. But he rarely did. That, too, was part of the performance. There's something hypnotic about this. Everything in the court has a role. That brass rooster perched on the lintel? It's not just decoration. It's a symbol of vigilance. The small leopard carved into a railing post? Strength and sovereignty. The bird with wings outstretched that crowns a ceremonial staff? Peace, or maybe the fragility of balance. Depends who you ask. You pass by a low doorway leading to a side chamber. There, a group of courtiers are gathered, heads bowed around a single object, a newly cast bronze head. Not a bust exactly. These commemorative heads are stylized, made to hold carved ivory tusks like candles in a ritual candelabra. They're portraits of Obas past, but not realistic ones. More like symbolic portraits. Think Instagram filters set to divine monarch. You catch a glimpse of one court official leaning close, almost whispering to the bronze. Or maybe he's just breathing on it. Hard to tell. Either way, it's reverent. Here's a quirky detail. The artisans who created these heads didn't have direct contact with the Oba. Nope. Too sacred. Too risky. They worked from descriptions passed down by word of mouth. Or, even more often, by dreams. That's right. Some bronze casters believed the ancestors would visit them in dreams to show them the correct proportions or expressions. A few historians roll their eyes at that, of course. But who's to say they weren't onto something? You've seen your own dreams get weirdly detailed. You wander through another open courtyard now, this one floored with crushed seashells that crunch softly under your steps. The light bounces off them like tiny stars. It's almost blinding. There are no written signs here. No engravings labeled with names or dates. This is intentional. Benin didn't have a tradition of written language like the Latin alphabet. Their history was oral, performative, visual. You read history not by flipping through a book, but by walking through it, by looking. And that brings you back to the Oba. Imagine trying to maintain control over a sprawling kingdom, with no emails, no newspapers, no social media, not even a town crier, and doing it largely through unspoken cues and image. You'd need a whole population trained to read the meanings behind gestures, clothing, statues, even silence itself. That's exactly what Benin did. Let's say the Oba decided to declare a day of mourning. He wouldn't announce it from a balcony. Instead, he might simply appear in a particular garment, stand in a particular courtyard, at a particular time. The royal drummers would adjust their rhythm. The chiefs would know. The city would follow. Not a word spoken. And let's not forget the emotin, the royal messengers and aides, people who trained for years in the art of silence, interpretation, and precise body language. You might see two of them nod to each other across a crowd, and suddenly half the room changes position. It's like watching synchronized swimmers in royal regalia. One popular story, true or not, who knows, tells of an Oba who once raised a finger during a meeting. Just one finger. Everyone in the room immediately fell to the ground. Not because they were afraid, but because that specific gesture, in that moment, was understood as a command to show total submission. Like pressing a mute button on 50 people at once. You pause for a moment now, sitting on a low wall where shade from a neem tree spills across your lap. It's a quiet place. A good place. You imagine how many decisions were made in this very courtyard without anyone saying a word. And it makes you think, how much of modern communication is noise? How much of it is filler, distraction, frantic words trying to cover awkward silences? Here, silence isn't awkward. It's mastery. It's precision. It's art. A young boy passes with a bronze staff topped by a crocodile. He doesn't look at you directly, but gives the slightest nod. It feels like he just said a full paragraph. You nod back. You're learning the language. You're led down a narrow path lined with raffia mats and slick river stones, where the scent of damp clay fills your nose like warm bread rising. There's a faint hiss in the air, like a whisper made of steam, and you realize you're getting closer to the lifeblood of Benin's artistry, the forge. This isn't some fiery industrial nightmare. It's intimate, almost meditative. The metalworker's quarter is quieter than you expected, more temple than factory. The air ripples from the heat, but it doesn't roar. It hums. You're about to witness how a kingdom built an entire history in silence and fire. In front of you sits a workshop with an open thatched roof. Sunlight cuts through in beams, catching on the fine red dust suspended in the air. You see 3 men crouched around what looks like a very decorative anthill. It's actually a clay mold, still steaming, and inside it is a story. A royal face. A scene of triumph. A reminder in metal of something no one dared say aloud. You are in the presence of the Eigen Aramwan, the Royal Guild of Brasscasters. And unless you're directly descended from one, you wouldn't have been allowed here. This is hallowed ground. It's where Benin's most guarded secrets were shaped by hand, with mouths shut and minds focused. Now, you might be wondering, why all the secrecy? Why the rituals? Why the long, silent stares into molten copper? Well, casting bronze in the Kingdom of Benin wasn't just a craft, it was a calling. Passed down through family lines, protected by taboo, and almost always done in connection to the Oba. You couldn't just roll in with a toolbox and start freelancing. Nope, you needed blood ties, apprenticeship, and a deep understanding of what not to say. Here's the process, if you're curious, and of course you are. First, the artist would sculpt the figure or plaque in beeswax. This wax model wasn't just a rough draft. It was detailed, expressive, complete. From the coils of a coral necklace to the folds in a dignitary's robe, every feature was added in wax. Carefully, silently. Then, the wax model was encased in a paste of fine clay, layered gradually like frosting on a cake that no one's allowed to eat. This mold would dry slowly, sometimes with low fires crackling nearby to help harden it. Once dried, the whole thing was fired again, hot enough to melt the wax out, leaving behind a hollow space. That's where the magic happened. Molten brass, gleaming, furious, 1,000 degrees of yes, was poured into the mold. It hissed, it surged, and it filled every tiny detail the wax had left behind. Hours later, once it cooled, the mold was broken open, and out came a new piece of Benin's visual history. Historians still argue whether this method originated in Benin or arrived via contact with the Portuguese in the 15th century. Some point to similarities with medieval European and Middle Eastern metalwork, but others insist Benin's craftsmanship predates those influences. Personally, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Cross-cultural inspiration, layered atop already thriving local genius. But here's the real twist. Each mold could only be used once. That's right, one sculpture per mold. No mass production, no duplicates. Once the mold was broken, the piece it created was singular, unique, irreplaceable, which means every bronze plaque you've ever seen from Benin, one of a kind, made by hand, by torchlight, by someone who probably didn't speak while working, someone who may not have even told their family what they were making. You hear a clatter in the distance, a metal ladle dropped on stone. The smiths barely look up. They're focused on a new figure taking shape. You can't quite see it yet, but the silhouette forming in clay looks like a warrior, broad shoulders, horned helmet, and something odd, a chicken. Is that a chicken under his arm? Turns out, yes. Benin art is full of unexpected imagery. Chickens, for instance, aren't just lunch. They symbolize ritual offerings. A chicken offered to the gods before a campaign could mean success. A chicken turned away? Better stay home. Quirkier still is the practice of casting charmed objects, talismans embedded with symbolic meaning or spiritual force. Some featured animals with human limbs. Others had removable heads or hidden compartments. These weren't toys. They were messages. And if you didn't know the code, well, you weren't meant to. In fact, some objects weren't meant to be seen at all. Certain sacred bronzes were buried, hidden behind palace walls, or locked away in shrines. They were cast to be hidden, like secrets solidified in metal. And when unearthed centuries later, their meaning wasn't always clear. Scholars still debate the purpose of one famously abstract bronze piece. Some think it's a musical instrument, others believe it's a cosmic calendar, and one particularly bold theory suggests it's a symbolic map of palace etiquette. You step back from the forge now, your feet dusty and your mind buzzing. The air is thick with smoke and understanding. There's something hypnotic about the repetition here. The same gestures, passed down for centuries. The same materials, the same tools, slightly evolved, sure, but still honoring the old ways. You feel like you're watching a loop in time, where ancestors and descendants occupy the same moment. A young apprentice walks past with a bundle of palm fronds, nodding toward the forge. "It's cooling," he says, barely above a whisper. Even he knows to speak softly here. You move on toward the rows of finished works, some still glowing with heat. They lie on raffia mats, cooling like cookies on a baking sheet. Each one is different. A hornblower caught mid-breath. A queen mother with an intricate headdress. A warrior clutching two leopards by the tail, as you do. You stop in front of one plaque that seems especially vivid. The man in it stands tall, but not arrogantly. His left hand holds a curved blade, and his right is outstretched, not in violence, but in offering. Above his head floats a bird. A parrot, maybe? A dove? Scholars still argue about that too. Birds, in Benin art, often symbolized messengers or spiritual presence. But some claim this one represents peace, an oba declaring that victory need not come through bloodshed. It's strange how this silent figure, forged centuries ago, still feels like he's trying to tell you something. Not demand, just suggest. You blink, and the light has changed. The sun's dropping fast, casting long shadows that stretch across the bronzes like fingers. Somewhere, a drum taps slowly. Just 4 beats, then silence. In Benin, that could mean a dozen different things. A ceremony starting. A visitor arriving. An ancestor remembered. The ambiguity doesn't bother you. It fits. That's the thing about the kingdom of Benin. You're never handed meaning on a platter. You have to watch. To listen. To feel it out. You pass one final figure as you leave the forge. A small, simple sculpture of a seated woman. Her hands rest on her knees. Her face is calm. Around her neck is a single coral bead. You stop for longer than you expected. And for the first time all day, you realize you haven't spoken either. You're not sure what you expected next, but it probably wasn't a corridor of metal faces watching you from the walls. The path curves around the royal courtyard, and suddenly you're inside a narrow gallery open to the sky. Rows and rows of bronze plaques stretch before you like a museum without labels. Except this isn't a museum. It's a memory palace, one that doesn't need audio guides, because everything here was designed to be understood, not explained. This is where Benin recorded its history, but not with ink. You walk slowly, almost reverently, past slabs of metal so richly carved. You can see individual strands of coral beads and the glint in a leopard's eye. The figures don't just stand, they move. Their bodies twist in gesture, their garments ripple in an invisible breeze, their hands rise mid-salute or pause in sacred offering. This is the Benin archives. Except instead of bookshelves, you've got 14th to 17th century plaques telling stories in relief. And instead of dates and footnotes, you've got silence, and the expectation that you know how to read the language of posture, hierarchy, animal pairings, weapon angles, bead counts, and hand positions. You stop in front of one panel, depicting a procession. At its center is the oba, towering, serene, and framed by giant ceremonial fans. Around him are warriors and attendants, all carved with varying sizes. Not randomly, of course. Scale wasn't about physical size in Benin art. It represented importance. So the Oba's head? Twice as big as anyone else's. Because here, thought and power reside in the head. That's not a metaphor. It's cultural logic. The head is the seat of inner energy, the Ava, the beauty of the soul. Historians still argue whether these plaques were purely decorative or also educational tools. Some believe they were intended to reteach court officials the values of etiquette and rank. Others say they were historical records for an audience that couldn't read in the Western sense, but could interpret metal like a living scroll. The deeper you go, the stranger and more beautiful the imagery becomes. Here's a man whose arms are made of snakes. Here's a child holding a bird with human eyes. Here's a warrior standing over a crocodile, while a small brass bell floats above his head. These aren't random artistic choices. Each has meaning rooted in Edo cosmology and royal myth. The crocodile, often associated with military strength and the ability to strike silently from below. The bird with human eyes, possibly a messenger between worlds. That bell, it's not just for ringing. It signals the presence of divine authority. And it gets weirder. You come across one plaque that shows an Oba sitting on what appears to be a pile of fish. No throne, no stool, just very smug-looking tilapia. Scholars scratch their heads over this one. Was it symbolic of abundance? A joke? A reference to a particular riverine tribute? No one really knows. That's part of the magic. One fringe theory, that some of these oddities were inside jokes between the Oba and his court, a way to embed memories and private meanings into public display. Like a royal meme, you had to be born into to get. And that's the beauty of this visual language. It wasn't static. It evolved. As events unfolded, new plaques were cast, new symbols adopted. Victories, visits from European traders, changes in ritual, everything had a plaque. But you couldn't just slap something together. These artworks were tightly controlled by the palace and executed by master guilds with generations of training. So while the Europeans who visited Benin in the 15th and 16th centuries marveled at the grandeur of the court, they often missed the real show, because it was happening in quiet metal all around them. There's a famous account from a Portuguese envoy who entered the Oba's palace and was stunned to see walls covered in shining copper images. What he didn't realize was that these weren't decorations. They were a timeline, a political document, a flex. You round a corner now, and the light shifts. A shaft of gold illuminates one particular plaque, a woman, regal and tall, flanked by two leopards. You realize this isn't the Oba. It's the Ioba, the Queen Mother. She's not a side character. She's a full-blown power player. Once a new Oba was crowned, his mother often became his most trusted advisor, and sometimes a political enforcer in her own right. And she had her own palace, her own rituals, her own bronze heads made in her honor, often even more intricately adorned than those of the male rulers. You can still see one today in certain museums, a fierce, broad-eyed head covered in a crown of tiny coral beads that rise like flames. So much for behind every great man. The Ioba stood beside him, and sometimes above. You can almost feel her presence in the gallery now. The way the light catches on the plaque makes it shimmer like she's stepping forward to speak. But, of course, she doesn't. None of them do. That's what strikes you, over and over again. This place is loud with memory, but utterly silent in sound. Some plaques depict violent scenes, warriors raising swords, captives kneeling, but even here, there's restraint. You won't find grotesque gore or exaggerated agony. It's stylized, composed. You understand the consequences without needing to see the blood. It's almost gentle, which is strange for scenes of conquest. But again, it's all about control. Control of imagery, control of memory, control of what is said and what isn't. You stop in front of one final piece before leaving the gallery. It's less polished than the others, older perhaps. The brass has darkened with age. It shows a group of figures huddled together under a crescent moon. One holds a drum, another holds a fish, a third, a palm frond. They don't appear to be royalty or warriors. They're not scaled up. They are ordinary, maybe even outcasts. And yet, here they are, immortalized in metal, like kings. Why? Some say this was an artist slipping in their own people. Others think it's a symbolic tale, a legend passed down through the guilds. There's even a theory that plaques like this were made during times of drought or crisis, to invoke communal memory. to remind the palace who supported it when times got hard. You stare a moment longer, the silence wrapping around you like a soft cloth. You feel the stories still vibrating off the walls, echoing through the stillness. Not erased, not forgotten, just waiting. And then, just like that, you step out of the gallery into the sun. You feel like you've just read 100 books without turning a single page. You leave the bronze gallery with a head full of stories and feet coated in fine red dust. The air outside has thickened slightly. Somewhere to your left, incense burns, a mix of camphor, cola nut, and something earthy that clings to your skin like a second breath. You're led now not by a person, but by sound. A slow gong rolls through the air every few seconds, deep, measured, and soft. Not the kind of bell that startles, but one that settles. It seems to say, "Come closer, but quietly." What you find isn't just another room. It's a courtyard of rules. This is the Iwebo Quarter, one of the palace's most secretive and structured areas, where court life is governed not by law books or loud declarations, but by the subtle choreography of guilds, objects, and unspoken understandings. Here, rank is everything. And rank isn't announced. It's worn, gestured, implied. The Kingdom of Benin didn't rely on loud power. It relied on knowledge encoded in objects. And that's where the guilds came in. You're about to meet the people who made sure that everything you've seen so far, from coral crowns to symbolic brass leopards, meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. Let's start with the structure. Benin's palace guilds weren't random craftsman collectives. They were hereditary, hierarchically ranked, and highly specialized. Some dealt only in ivory. Some handled the sacred choral regalia. Some were master drummers. Others were responsible for sweeping the royal pathways, but only on ritual days, and only when the Oba gave a silent signal. You step into a shaded hall where two men in indigo robes are arranging long strips of cloth on a low platform. One is braiding strands of red coral. The other is polishing a pair of brass ankle cuffs shaped like miniature drums. Neither speaks. Why would they? Their job is not to explain. It's to convey. Guild members in Benin were trained to speak fluently in material. Coral beads could signal more than wealth. They indicated rank, ritual status, and even mood. A specific necklace could say, "I'm here on royal business," or "I'm observing mourning." You just had to read it. That brass staff with the bird atop it, that wasn't ornamental. It was a message, a badge of negotiation, a visual contract signed in silence. Historians still debate whether these guilds functioned more like civil servants or ceremonial stewards. The truth is both. They helped run the court, but they also preserved the kingdom's symbolic structure, like living metaphors, walking grammar rules, embedded in court life. And here's something quirky for you. Some guilds had musical dialects. That's right, drumming wasn't just rhythm, it was language. Entire phrases could be encoded in beats. You'd hear a pattern and know, without any need for shouting, whether a dignitary was approaching, a ceremony was starting, or someone had royally messed up. You continue deeper into the quarter and find yourself watching what looks like a dance, but isn't. A woman is teaching two young apprentices how to kneel. Yes, how to kneel. The exact angle of the spine, the depth of the bow, the speed of the descent. This is the art of respect, and it's precise. You do it wrong, and it's not just embarrassing, it's politically disastrous. You pause to take this in. The way even humility is choreographed here. The woman doesn't raise her voice. She taps the back of one boy's shoulder. He adjusts. She lifts a hand in a half circle, and the other apprentice corrects his posture. It's like watching a conductor rehearse a silent orchestra. Suddenly, a horn sounds, not brashly, but like a cautious echo. Somewhere else in the palace, something important is about to happen, and the guilds move like they've been waiting. Two older men step forward carrying a bundle of cloth, and you follow them to a different courtyard. It's set up like a mini stage. A canopy is being raised. A low stool is polished to a dull gleam. You notice one tiny brass bell tucked beneath the platform. Here, the Oba may make an appearance, not to speak, but to be seen. The court is preparing a visual performance, not a press conference. In Benin, the court functioned almost like a symphony. Everyone had a part to play, and silence wasn't absence, it was space. The Oba didn't need to roar to be heard. He needed only to appear, wearing the right coral, flanked by the right objects, standing in the right light. One movement of his wrist could change the day's agenda. And if he chose not to appear at all, that meant something too. It's why these guilds were so vital. They were the stage crew, costume designers, choreographers, and historians rolled into one. They were keepers of the kingdom's grammar. You passed by the Abiwe Guild area. These were the palace attendants and messengers. Think of them as royal protocol experts. They delivered messages, managed audiences, and helped coordinate sacred rituals. And sometimes, their message wasn't verbal. It was a gesture, a raised staff, a folded cloth, a posture held just long enough for everyone to notice. One legend speaks of an Abiwe messenger who delivered a royal no by simply placing an empty gourd on the palace steps. No sound, no note, just a mute container of nothing, saying everything. Quirky, maybe, but effective. You walk now through a long hallway lined with regalia, not on mannequins, but laid out on woven mats. Ivory cuffs, leopard skin sashes, tunics embroidered with bronze studs. Each set belonged to a particular court title. Each outfit was a sentence, a paragraph, a status update. And the best part? Everyone knew how to read them. Imagine a culture where your outfit didn't just say fashion forward, but I witnessed a solar ritual 5 years ago and haven't broken a taboo since. Or, I'm in mourning for an elder cousin on my mother's father's side, and I have the Oba's blessing to speak third in line at tomorrow's procession. It's fashion with subtitles, and they don't come in English. You rest for a moment in the shade of a carved wooden column. The designs spiral upward, birds and snakes, trees and stars. The silence of the guild quarter isn't eerie anymore. It's peaceful, confident, like the quiet of a master weaver at work or a dancer counting beats in her head before the music starts. You begin to see why the people of Benin didn't need loud laws or towering speeches. They had this language of object, movement, and stillness. It was dense, complex, but deeply human. And the more you learn to read it, the more you wonder how loud your world really needs to be. A final gong sounds, and with it, a soft breeze. The coral beads sway gently. The brass glints. And for a moment, it feels like every object in the palace exhales together. No voice says it. No sign confirms it. But you know, something important just happened. You wake up, though not from sleep exactly, more like from a kind of cultural trance, still sitting in the shade of that carved column. Around you, the palace seems to have shifted, just slightly, as if it waited for your understanding to catch up. Today, you're headed to meet the people behind the curtain, the ones whose work never appeared in bronze or coral, but without whom the kingdom wouldn't have lasted a generation, let alone centuries. You're about to learn the quiet power of Benin's royal women. And not just the queen mothers, the Ioba you met in the gallery, but the entire ecosystem of women who moved through palace life with a grace and influence that defied the male-centered histories of outsiders. The route takes you behind a garden wall where citrus trees grow in tight rows and goats nibble nonchalantly at hibiscus petals. Beyond this small grove lies the Egwi Ioba, the palace of the queen mother herself. It's not a second-rate annex. It's a palace in its own right. Spacious, geometrically perfect, protected by high red clay walls decorated with birds, fish, and motifs that feel distinctly feminine but utterly regal. No pastel softness here. This is majesty with muscle. You're greeted, not by guards, but by older women in elaborately knotted wrappers and towering coral combs. They don't say a word, but they nod in unison. Somehow it feels like a welcoming committee and a challenge at once. You step inside. In the center of the courtyard, a large bronze head sits on a low altar, taller than your knees, heavier than it looks, and perfectly still. It's the famous portrait of a queen mother from centuries past. Her face is calm, lips slightly parted like she's about to say something. She never will. But her silence is louder than most shouts. Historians still argue about which Ioba this represents. Some say Idia, the first woman granted the title, a kingmaker who helped her son Uware rise to power in the 15th century. Others suggest it may represent a later Ioba, or perhaps an idealized figure, part memory, part symbol. Regardless, what's clear is this: the Queen Mother wasn't just ceremonial. She held political sway. She advised the Oba, ran her own court, and could command troops if necessary. She was even worshipped as a semi-divine figure after death. And she wasn't alone in this power structure. The women of Benin's palace included the Omu, female rulers in certain provinces, senior priestesses, diviners, and an entire regiment of royal wives and daughters who managed court rituals, inheritance lines, and diplomatic protocol. These weren't passive roles. They were strategic, essential, and demanding. You follow a line of coral-inlaid floor tiles into a shaded meeting hall. It smells of sandalwood and camwood powder. On the wall hangs a set of ivory tusks, each carved with miniature figures, a woman holding a gourd, another balancing a fish on her head, another clutching a horn. These tusks tell their own stories, of course. And here's the kicker. Many weren't just about the Oba. Some were records of the Queen Mother's victories. Their alliances. Their rituals. You sit on a low stool and watch a small group of women rehearse a ceremonial dance. It's slow, precise, more like gesture than motion. One holds a fan. Another walks in a perfect arc, her heel barely touching the earth. The third moves backward, eyes closed, as if remembering something not hers. No one speaks. They don't have to. Every step, every turn, every tilt of the chin is part of a language older than writing. You realize suddenly how little space these women were given in European accounts. When British explorers or Portuguese traders wrote home, they barely mentioned them, if at all. And yet, within these walls, the Queen Mother's approval could make or break a king's policies. You're told of a legend where the Ioba refused to attend a major ritual because the Oba had ignored a morning rite. For 3 days, the palace paused. The drums didn't play. The messengers halted. Even the market outside quieted down. It wasn't until the Oba performed a purification sacrifice, with her blessing, that life resumed. No war. No confrontation. Just withheld presence. A silent veto. Here's something quirky. In some rituals, the Queen Mother's senior attendants wore masks not to hide their identity, but to amplify their roles. These weren't disguises. They were symbolic personas, ancestral spirits, river goddesses, and cosmic intermediaries. Imagine a boardroom where everyone shows up in costume, but instead of being weird, it's legally binding. You pass a doorway where one of these masks is stored. It's bird-like, elongated, with almond eyes and a mouth frozen mid-hum. A breeze lifts the fabric hanging beside it. It rustles like applause. You begin to see how silence functions differently here. Among the women of the court, silence isn't just a pause. It's a method, a reservoir of strength. You don't shout when you already know the outcome. You walk into a smaller chamber now, lit by candles set in clay dishes. The floor is swept perfectly clean. A narrow table holds 5 small figurines, women holding babies, yams, cloth, a bird, and a small drum. A shrine to fertility? Prosperity? Hard to say. No plaque explains it. It isn't for you. But you feel welcome all the same. One of the older women approaches with a bowl of water and gently pours it over your fingers. It's not a blessing. It's a gesture of hospitality. She doesn't speak, just smiles, then walks away. You sit down again, watching the candle flames dance. A small chorus begins to hum. A lullaby, maybe. It drifts through the air like mist. Not words, but near words. Like the language dreams use. And suddenly, you realize something. While the Oba's silence was power, the Ioba's silence was presence. He didn't speak because his words were law. She didn't speak because her absence could break the law. Different kinds of quiet. Equal in weight. The day fades now. The last bit of sunlight skips off the ivory tusks and vanishes. You rise and step out into the courtyard, heart full of things no one ever said, but everyone somehow knew. You pass under an arch of carved wood, birds above, fish below. No signs, no guides, but you know what it means. You're leaving the realm of the royal women. And for the first time in hours, you think about the modern world again. The noise, the speed, the insistence on being heard. And you wonder if, maybe, the real power lies in learning when not to speak. You're back under the open sky now, walking along a path of pressed earth that winds behind the inner palace. Palm trees whisper above you, and somewhere far off, a child laughs. But your destination is something older than joy, older than the palace, older than even the memory of kings. You're going to the shrines. Not tourist shrines, not light a candle and leave shrines, but the real ones, the ancestral sanctuaries where history isn't written or carved, but fed, cleaned, whispered to, and occasionally scolded. The Kingdom of Benin didn't keep archives in a vault. It kept them in spirit form. The shrines are scattered through the royal grounds, tucked behind courtyards, beneath overhangs, or nestled at the roots of trees that no one dares to trim. You start with the most important, the Euchre Shrine, dedicated to the lineage of Obis. From a distance, it doesn't look like much. Just a low platform, some carved sticks arranged in a fan, a few clay bowls, a curtain of dried raffia. But as you draw near, something shifts. The air grows cooler. Still, you're not alone here, and not in the usual way. Each stick in that fan is a memory. They're called Euchre, ancestral staffs, carved for every departed king. Not flashy, but packed with coded detail, spiral cuts for reign length, tiny notches for specific rituals performed, patterns passed down through guilds that only the initiated understand. It's a filing system in wood. But more than that, it's a phone line. Because this is where the Obis speaks to his ancestors, not with prayers, but with action. Libations poured. Foods left out. A rooster feather placed just so. Silence, in Benin, was never empty. It was directed, focused, intentional. You watch as an elder approaches the shrine barefoot, carrying a small bowl of yam mash and palm oil. He doesn't speak, just kneels, touches the earth, offers the food, walks away. Historians still debate how much these shrines influence state decisions. Some argue they were purely symbolic. Others insist no major political act happened without first consulting them. Either way, they mattered, because everyone acted like they mattered. You're led next to a smaller shrine, this one shaded by a tree that hums with bees. A mound of red clay rises from the ground, encrusted with shells and fragments of brass. At its base, a ring of white chalk lines the soil. This isn't a king's shrine, it's for a diviner. Here's the twist. Not all shrines were royal. Some belonged to spiritual specialists, diviners, herbalists, even certain guild leaders. And while their rank wasn't always recorded in bronze or ivory, their influence shaped how the kingdom moved. You remember that brass plaque you saw earlier, the one with the bird and the mysterious hand gesture? Scholars now think it may have represented a divination ritual, possibly Ifa, an intricate spiritual system where the answers to life's hardest questions are teased from coded stories and signs. And yes, that too was done mostly in silence. You sit beside the shrine for a while, taking in the scent of crushed kola nut and wet earth. The bees don't seem to mind you. In fact, one lands gently on your sleeve and stays there, perfectly still, like it's listening. Eventually, a young boy arrives carrying a carved calabash bowl. He places it at the base of the mound and traces a spiral in the dirt. No words, no ceremony, just a practiced hand repeating a message only the ancestors can read. It makes you think, in a world where everyone's shouting to be heard, what kind of civilization prefers not to speak unless absolutely necessary? The answer lies here, in these shrines. Benin's spiritual life was built not on confession, but connection. You didn't cry out to your gods, you included them. Gave them seats at the table. Let them witness. Let them rest. Even the palace itself was designed to accommodate the invisible. Certain rooms were left open not for light, but for spirits to pass through. Some corridors had no doors, only thresholds marked with chalk and feathers. You didn't bar spirits, you guided them. And here's something quirky. Some royal rituals involved silence as an offering. Not gold, not incense, just shared stillness. The idea being that noise was for the needy. The truly devoted simply showed up and listened. In fact, one festival, the Igu, was known for its moments of total, orchestrated hush. Thousands of people, all gathered, all silent, watching the Oba perform the blessing rituals with nothing but gestures. A flick of the wrist, a footstep forward, a palm held over a flame. It was said that if you closed your eyes during the Igu blessing, you could hear the ancestors responding in the wind. You continue your walk past a wall of ochre clay, worn smooth where thousands of hands have touched it. Another shrine appears, this one enclosed. Inside, you glimpse the faint flicker of a lamp, and beside it, a leopard skull. Yes, a real one. Leopards were more than mascots in Benin. They were spiritual avatars, symbols of royal power. Obis were often compared to leopards, silent, swift, and sacred. And some say when an Oba died, his spirit took the form of a leopard to roam the palace for a time. One particularly fringe theory suggests the leopard skulls were placed in shrines not to ward off evil, but to house departed kings. A kind of noble Airbnb for the afterlife. You chuckle softly at that one, but then pause. Because it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You start to see how the silence of the kingdom isn't just about restraint. It's about invitation. A space made quiet so that something else, older, wiser, not quite human, can be heard. You return to the main path as the sky begins to pink in at the edges. Crickets start their chorus. Somewhere, a drum taps gently, 5 beats, a pause, then 5 more. You look back at the shrines and wonder if the ancestors are listening, or if they already heard everything you didn't say. And as you walk away, you carry their silence with you, not as a burden, but as a hum, a heartbeat, a reminder that sometimes the deepest histories are the ones you whisper to the soil. The path that stretches before you now is quieter than any you've walked yet, not because no one's nearby, but because everyone here knows the stakes of silence. You're entering a part of the royal palace where voice was the rarest tool of all, the Oba's private quarters. You're not sure what you expected. Maybe grandeur, gold, more of those sculpted brass leopards pouncing out of the shadows. But no, what you get is restraint. Smooth stone, cool corridors, subtle, geometric beauty. It's like the palace is holding its breath, as if the walls themselves are taught never to speak before spoken to. This is where the Oba, divine king, political center, spiritual conduit, lived, moved, and almost never spoke publicly unless ritual demanded it. In Benin, the Oba wasn't just king. He was the literal axis of the world. He didn't walk among people. He emerged. He didn't issue opinions. He revealed truths. And often, those truths came not through his words, but through what he wore, touched, or refused to touch. As you move through the quiet halls, you pass attendants who step aside with gentle bows. One nods at a doorway flanked by 2 carved elephants. You enter. Inside is the Oba's reception chamber, a room more intimate than any throne room you've seen in your modern mind's eye. No velvet drapes, no glistening chandeliers, just rows of carved panels, the soft flicker of oil lamps, and at the far end, the stool. Not a throne, a stool, covered in coral, ringed with brass, and low to the ground. This was where decisions were made, not with loud proclamations, but with ritual objects, coded silence, and the eyes of the kingdom watching. When the Oba sat here, his gestures were law. His posture, straight, still, serene, was a kind of legal document in itself. Historians still argue whether the Oba was truly absolute, or if palace elders and guild leaders had more influence than the mythology lets on. Some even suggest that part of his power lay in his ambiguity. No one could challenge what was never made explicit. You sit quietly near the edge of the chamber, half expecting a figure to walk in, dressed head to toe in coral beads and cowries, layered in so many symbolic items he barely needs to move. But the room remains empty. Instead, you study the artifacts on display. A single iron staff shaped like a serpent's tongue, a mask carved from ivory so thin it almost glows, a fan made of parrot feathers and mother of pearl. None of these items shout. They shimmer, whisper, insist quietly. Each object once functioned as speech. A visitor requesting an audience might receive the fan, wait, or a string of coral. You are permitted, but watched. Or nothing. No, there's a story of an Oba who refused to speak for an entire lunar cycle. His court still ran. Messages were still delivered. And somehow, through gestures, shifts in ritual, and the movement of items between chambers, decisions were made. The silence wasn't frustrating. It was fascinating. Here's a quirky little aside for you. The Oba's slippers were never allowed to touch the bare earth. He was too sacred. Attendants would lay down woven mats wherever he walked. Or, in formal processions, he'd be carried altogether. The idea was that his contact with the earth could bless or damage it. Too much divine foot traffic? Things might grow in the wrong places. You peek into a side room and find what looks like a dressing area. Coral garments hang on carved pegs. Each bead was once traded up the Niger Delta, polished by hand, strung with intent. It took weeks, sometimes months, to prepare the Oba for a single ritual. Not because he needed help dressing, but because every layer, every object, told a story. A particular robe meant, I invoke my ancestors. Another, I stand in judgment. One especially elaborate ensemble, never worn twice, was reserved for the Yuji Aroba, the festival of royal ancestors, where the Oba performed as the embodiment of all who came before him. You notice a stool with a soft indent in the center, worn from use, and it hits you. The Oba was also human. Someone sat here, listened here, maybe even chuckled softly at the court jester's antics. Yes, there were jesters, but even they followed ritual timing. But still, he rarely spoke. Instead, he moved through a curated world. Every item in his quarters reinforced who he was. The brass leopards? Strength. The coral? Sacredness. The ivory? Wisdom. The stillness? Mystery. There's one object that catches your eye now. A mirror. It's set in a brass frame, highly polished, resting atop a stone ledge. You step forward, and for a moment, you see yourself, dusty, slightly flushed, wide-eyed from everything you've learned. And then you realize, in this culture, mirrors weren't just for checking your look. They were for reflecting status. To look into a mirror in Benin wasn't a vanity move. It was a spiritual act. You saw not just yourself, but the lineage that made you. You checked if your ancestors were still with you, if your appearance honored them, if your silence carried weight. There's a legend that the Oba, before stepping into any major ceremony, would gaze into his brass mirror, not to admire, but to consult. Did he look tired? Time to cancel the rite. Did his reflection seem distant? The ancestors were unhappy. Was the mirror cloudy? Trouble ahead. It's the kind of quiet ritual that makes perfect sense here. In a world where silence isn't emptiness, but attention. You return to the main chamber one last time, and suddenly, you hear something. A single note, long and low, from a ceremonial horn. It's not here in the room. It's coming from somewhere deeper within the palace. A summoning? A dismissal? No one rushes. No one reacts. That, too, is telling. The Oba's world isn't reactive. It's steady, like a pond whose surface only moves when something truly worth noticing drops in. And you? You feel like that drop. One more ripple in an ancient system that continues whether you speak or not. You bow gently as you leave, not because anyone told you to, but because it feels right. The silence here has taught you manners. You emerge from the Oba's quarters blinking in the afternoon light, which now falls at a gentle slant, as if the sky itself has learned how to tiptoe. The quiet of the royal chamber still clings to your thoughts like incense on fabric, but where you're headed now pulses with a different energy. Not louder, but more rhythmic, more alive. You're on your way to meet the Awoki, the ceremonial performers and oral historians of Benin. If the Oba was silence embodied, the Awoki were sound sculpted. Not loud, but deliberate. They didn't shout history into the world. They sang it, moved it, etched it into memory with cadence and costume, not chalk and ink. The performance grounds aren't far, just past a line of sculpted wooden posts carved with spiraling fish and bird motifs. The floor here is smooth earth, stamped flat from centuries of sandals. Overhead, palm fronds wave lazily, creating a dappled ceiling of sunlight and shadow. You take a seat beneath a woven awning as figures begin to appear, almost silently. At first, just one, then three, then a full dozen, all dressed in varying degrees of color and formality. Some with coral bead chest pieces, others with bronze-studded wraps. One wearing a leopard skin sash you suspect is older than most modern countries. There are no microphones, no scripts, just movement. And then it begins. Not with a shout, with a gesture. An elder raises a hand skyward, then slowly draws it down in a wide arc, fingers splayed. The others respond by kneeling. Not one sound escapes their lips. And yet, you understand, a story is beginning. This is Benin's performance archive, not entertainment, but embodied record-keeping. A system of dances, chants, reenactments, and stylized pantomime passed down across generations, each movement preserving a moment, a mood, a moral. One Awoki steps forward now, holding a staff wrapped in cowrie shells. He begins a call-and-response chant, low and rhythmic. Ogbio, Ogbio. The day rises, the path clears. The others answer, their voices overlapping like waves. You don't understand every word. Some are in Edo, others in older dialects, but you don't need a translation. The melody tells you what the syntax can't. This is the story of a king's first journey, not by sea or war, but by dream. And here's the twist. The Awoki don't just tell the story. They become it. One performer kneels in the dirt, tracing symbols into it with her finger. Another mimics rowing, his face taut with imagined wind. A third drops to the ground and begins to crawl, not pitifully, but reverently, as if retracing the crawl a newborn must make toward its purpose. You notice the audience isn't clapping. They're watching, learning, remembering. Because this isn't a show. It's a syllabus. Historians still debate whether these performances were art or education. But here's the trick. In Benin, those were never separate categories. To teach was to enchant. To enchant was to preserve. And what they preserved? The unwritten, the unspoken, the things too powerful or too sacred to risk on paper. Take, for instance, the legend of the talking drum. Not the literal instrument, though that exists too, but a recurring Awoki figure, half myth, half metaphor, who carries the truth that others are afraid to speak. You see him now, a masked performer clad in stripes of red and white, holding a staff shaped like a tongue. He dances in slow spirals, spinning each time he says something significant. No words leave his mouth, but everyone leans forward. The message is felt, not heard. There's even a fringe theory, though most scholars won't touch it, that the Awoki encoded political dissent into their chants during times of crisis. A slight variation in rhythm here, an unusual gesture there, and the elders would know something was wrong without anyone needing to shout rebellion. You smile. It tracks. In a kingdom where power is measured in silence, the loudest form of resistance would naturally be a whisper that dances. As the performance continues, you catch a particularly vivid moment. Two dancers recreate a standoff between the Oba and a river spirit. But it's not a fight. It's a negotiation. They circle each other slowly, exchanging items. One offers a leopard's tooth, the other a bunch of leaves. And then, this is the best part, they trade places. The Oba becomes the spirit becomes the king. The crowd lets out a low murmur, not of surprise, but recognition. They've seen this lesson before. Power is a role, not a birthright. You begin to understand why European visitors, despite their careful notes and diagrams, never quite got Benin. They were listening for speeches, looking for documents, but they missed the heartbeat of the place, the stories told in wrists and footwork, in calloused fingers and choreographed silence. One plaque can hold 1,000 meanings, but one dancer moving like a proverb? That's a lifetime of memory. The performance winds down not with applause, but with shared stillness. The Awoki lower their staffs, remove their masks, and file out, not to the back, but into the trees, where their silhouettes disappear like breath. You sit in the hush that follows, overwhelmed but grounded. The dirt where they danced is marked now, scuffed with patterns. You could sweep it, but you won't. The kingdom has left you a message. One final performer, an elder, moving slowly but with precision, places a carved gourd in the center of the performance space. Then she nods once and disappears behind a woven curtain. You walk forward and peer into the gourd. It's empty. Or maybe not. Maybe it holds the weight of all the things you've just seen. All the meanings too large for words. You step away. You've heard the kingdom speak now, not with mouths, but with memory. And the silence? That was never a void. It was a stage. You wander through the twilight now, your mind buzzing, not with noise, but with the slow, glowing embers of understanding. You've seen the Oba's world, heard the Awoki perform histories without ink, touched shrines humming with presence. And just when you think you've absorbed everything the kingdom of Benin can offer, someone hands you a comb. Not just any comb. It's carved from ivory, etched with zigzags and tiny fish, polished smooth. Delicate but deliberate. This, your guide whispers, finally breaking the spell of silence, is also a message. Welcome to the world of everyday eloquence, where beauty wasn't a luxury, but a language, and daily life was layered with quiet symbolism. You're about to step into the invisible vocabulary of Benin's common objects, where even a spoon could speak and a hairstyle could settle an argument. The path leads you now to the royal artisans' quarters, not the bronze casters this time, but the makers of things that move through hands every day. Combs, fans, boxes, pipes, mats, stools, sandals. The tangible poetry of a kingdom that communicated through craftsmanship. In Benin, Nothing was made without meaning. You're invited to sit in a low circular compound lit by fire pots. Around you, half a dozen craftspeople work steadily, each in their niche. One braids a raffia mat using a spiral pattern. Another shaves narrow slats of wood for a stool. A third rubs ochre into a clay tobacco pipe shaped like a crocodile's snout. No one hurries. No one wastes motion. A woman walks over with a tray of small items. Wooden spoons, clay pots, ivory hairpins. She invites you to choose one. You lift a comb, much like the one from earlier, and she smiles. This comb is for mourning, she says. Not sadness, respect. The fish on it are for memory. They never blink, so they never forget. It hits you like a soft breeze. In Benin, objects remember things. They're not disposable, not just pretty. They store feeling, history, behavior. Historians still argue how widespread this symbolic literacy was. Did every citizen read their spoon? Or was it the privilege of trained elites? Regardless, the kingdom was steeped in this material fluency. You run your fingers along the comb's edge and feel not just art, but intention. Take clothing, for example. A wrapper printed with the right dye pattern could signal everything from political allegiance to marriage status to what festival you last attended. Ankle beads might indicate a person's social group, or even their profession. The spacing of the knots? That could signal rank within a guild. Even sleeping mats were stitched with personal symbols, some geometric, some abstract. If you had a guest, they'd be given a mat with no symbols, clean, neutral, polite. If you really wanted them to feel at home, you lent them your family's mat, with its woven ancestry embedded in the design. One-man gestures for you to follow, and you find yourself in a small interior room, cool and dim, with rows of low wooden chests. He lifts one open to reveal dozens of ivory hairpieces, each with a different motif. Birds, waves, faces, stars. These are not decorations, he says softly. They are declarations. You pick one, an elaborate swirl shaped like a snail's shell. Slow wisdom, he explains. You wear it when you want to be patient or pretend to be. You laugh, quietly, because of course even sarcasm could be carved into bone. Here's a quirky detail. Some women wore hairpins that faced backward during times of gossip or household tension, like a passive-aggressive emoji you wore in your braid. You imagine a mother raising her eyebrows as she twists her hair, just so. No shouting, no lectures, just the hairpin, turned slightly the wrong way. Message received. You continue through the artisan complex, where items are cooling, drying, curing in the heat. A teenage apprentice shows you a set of carved calabash bowls. One has dots that curve like a spiral. Another features concentric rings and a single slash through the center. He offers no explanation, but your eye lingers on the second bowl, and something about that pattern reminds you of the Oba's mirror. The bowl is empty, but the message isn't. In Benin, the space around something was often as meaningful as the thing itself. An unmarked section of cloth, an empty patch on a mural, a silence in a song. These were intentional absences, held open like questions. You pause at a mural in the hallway, weathered and faint, but still legible. A procession of people, animals, and spirits moves across it, all facing the same direction. Except one. In the corner, a small figure stands backward, holding a calabash above its head. You ask what it means. Your guide smiles. That one. He listens to dreams. He faces the past. A chill, but the good kind, runs down your arms. You're starting to see it now. How this society spoke in layers. Not loud or boastful, but richly, intentionally, with the kind of craftsmanship that outlasts breath. Even children's toys had lessons carved into them. A spinning top with 4 painted sides taught about the seasons. A rattle shaped like a gourd reminded them of the harvest gods. Even lullabies had double meanings, soft for babies, sharp for parents listening nearby. You rest in the shade as the craftspeople continue their quiet work. No one rushes. The kingdom isn't built for urgency. It's built for clarity. And as the sky begins to tilt into gold, someone hands you a wooden box carved with stars. Inside is a necklace of rough coral, unfinished, uneven, but clearly worn. You turn it in your hands. It belonged to someone, you ask. The artisan nods. He was a drummer. He wore it during rain ceremonies. When it broke, he asked us not to fix it. Why? Because it said more this way. You sit for a while, necklace on your lap, the silence humming all around you. The message is clear. In the kingdom of Benin, even the broken things spoke, especially the broken things. Evening deepens now, draping the palace in that rich, indigo hush that makes firelight seem like memory instead of heat. You've spent the day immersed in the rituals of silence, the language of objects, and the gestures that ripple like soundless bells through the kingdom of Benin. But tonight, something changes. You're being taken outside the palace walls. Not far, just beyond the red clay perimeter where the city breathes more freely, where guilds cluster, where marketplaces murmur, where the quiet still holds, but with more texture. Laughter here is allowed, though even that seems choreographed, like a flute playing in the right key. Your guide leads you down a path between two earthen buildings. The air smells like charcoal, ground melon seeds, and the faint iron tang of newly beaten metal. A rhythmic clink-clink, pause, clink rings out ahead. You're about to meet the blacksmiths. And if you think that sounds like a noisy affair, well, think again. The Eigensmiths of Benin were not only metal workers. They were conjurers of silence. Every hammer strike was a syllable. Every cooling blade, a pause. These weren't just tools they made. These were objects of consequence. Ritual knives, ceremonial staffs, ancestral bells. Bells that only rang once, and then were buried to echo in the spirit realm. The smith's courtyard is narrow but packed with purpose. A forge glows low in one corner, and a wide slab of stone serves as an anvil. Around it sit men of various ages, some sharpening, others shaping, one simply polishing a blade until it gleams like moonlight. You sit beside them on a stool so smooth it might have been carved by time itself. One man holds up a dagger, no longer than your hand. The handle is wrapped in faded cloth. The blade bears tiny inlays, swirls, and dots like constellations. You ask if it's for fighting. He smiles gently, then shakes his head. This is for oaths. An oath dagger, used in rituals where silence was sacred. You swore something, cut a kola nut, and left the nut, not the words, at the shrine. The blade remembered what you said. No lawyers needed. You realize then that weapons in Benin weren't just for war. Many weren't used at all. They were meant to be displayed, invoked, blessed. Power, in Benin, didn't always need to be wielded. Sometimes it just needed to be nearby. You're shown a ceremonial axe next. Surprisingly small, with a head shaped like a bird's beak. Used by rain priests, someone explains. For calling storms. But how, you ask? He taps the haft of the axe twice against the earth. That's it. 2 taps. Not to summon thunder, but to ask permission. There's a fringe story, your guide adds, about a smith who made an axe so perfect, it was believed to have its own spirit. It could only be stored in silence. No one could speak its name unless rain was falling. Eventually, it was sealed in a clay jar and buried beneath the riverbank. They say you can still hear it clinking during the monsoon season when the water rises. You grin. Probably a myth. Then again, this is Benin. You're ushered toward a side area now, where young apprentices practice shaping iron into smooth loops and spirals. Not weapons. Not tools. Currency. In Benin, metal wasn't just practical, it was symbolic wealth. Cast brass manillas, bracelet-shaped ingots, were traded, gifted, and used as bridal dowries. But even those carried layers of meaning. You hold one in your hand. It's warm, solid, simple. But there, just on the inside curve, someone has scratched 3 diagonal lines. What does that mean, you ask? Your guide leans close. It means held promise. This one was part of a wedding set. You stare at the manila. Imagine it clinking gently on a wrist. Imagine its twin, somewhere, still being worn by the descendant of that long-ago bride. And then you think about how much of this world was built to last. Not just in strength, but in message. Benin didn't build to impress. It built to endure. Even when the British came. Yes, that story's coming. But not tonight. Their journals marveled at the tools they found. Sharp as razors. Balanced like dancers. But what they never understood. Most of these tools had never drawn blood. They were not made for conquest. They were made for ritual. For storytelling. For keeping promises. You sit quietly as one of the smiths fans the coals again. Sparks rise like fireflies, catching in the dark. You notice the rhythm of their work isn't random. It follows a pattern. A kind of music. 3 taps. A pause. A soft scrape. Repeat. You ask, is that a signal? He nods. It says, this is for peace. Historians still debate how intentional this system was. Was the rhythm formalized? Was it a guild code? Or just the natural result of repetitive craft? You suspect the truth lives somewhere in between. Like most things in Benin, meaning wasn't always written down. It was lived, felt, passed hand to hand. Eventually, the work winds down. Tools are cleaned, blades sheathed. A few are set carefully on a stone platform to cool beneath the moonlight. One young smith takes a palm frond and brushes the earth smooth where they'd been working. You ask him why. He shrugs, almost embarrassed. So the spirits won't trip. You don't laugh. You nod. It makes perfect sense here. You rise, brushing dust from your lap, and thank the smiths. They don't say much, just small nods, slight smiles. The same kind of acknowledgement you've come to recognize all over this kingdom. You're walking back now, guided by a torchbearer whose flame flickers blue in the breeze. Behind you, the forge's glow fades into the night. The echo of the tapping lingers in your bones like heartbeat. And you realize, in a kingdom where silence speaks volumes, even the hammer sings in code. It's deep night now, and yet the kingdom doesn't sleep. Not entirely. You're walking through a narrow lane, lit only by the moon and the soft flicker of oil lamps mounted in clay sconces. The hush is thicker here, like velvet draped across the senses. You feel as though you've stepped into a dream stitched together by soft footsteps, night birds, and the scent of smoldering wood. Where are you going? To the storytellers. Not the royal performers, the awoki you've already met, but the everyday tellers. The mothers, uncles, herbalists, and elders who spin legends at dusk. The voices that stitch identity between generations, using no stage, no drum, just laps and listening ears. Your guide leads you to a quiet courtyard ringed with benches. In the center, a firepot, low and glowing. Children curl beside parents. A goat bleats softly and is hushed with a tap. This isn't a show. This is the night's breath. You settle in just as an elder, a woman with deep smile lines and a wrapped headcloth, rises. She holds nothing. Wears no quarrel. But the crowd leans in. Then she begins. Not with once upon a time, but with a question. Have you ever met a tortoise who lies so well, even the gods forget? And just like that, you're hooked. She begins to unravel the story of Ikena the tortoise, a trickster so clever he once convinced the sky spirits to host him for dinner every new moon. But instead of stealing gold or power, Ikena stole silence. He bottled it in a gourd and tried to sell it to the crocodiles. You laugh. Everyone does. But the message is clear. Silence is powerful, but dangerous in the wrong shell. This is how Benin passed on ethics, warnings, spiritual truths. Through animals that talked, spirits that baked yam, rivers that refused to flow unless honored properly. Some tales lasted 2 minutes. Others were full moon marathons. You catch a phrase the elder repeats. The ear is not always the mouth's friend. It comes up again and again, like a lullaby woven through the tale. Later, someone explains, it means not every truth should be shared. Some are better carried. Historians still argue whether Benin had formal schools for children. There's limited evidence of institutional education. But when you hear stories like this, you realize the whole city was a classroom. You're shown another kind of storyteller now, an old man who doesn't speak at all. He draws. Using a burnt stick on clay, he begins to sketch in fast, swooping lines. A snake curls into a bird. A tree turns into a laughing face. A drum sprouts legs and runs away. Children giggle. One mimics the drawing with her fingers in the dust beside her. This, your guide explains, is visual parable. It's storytelling without narrative. Just images. Each family has their own favorites. Some are personal. Others belong to entire clans. You ask how people know what the drawings mean. They don't. Your guide grins. They remember what their grandmother told them it meant. That's the difference. You realize then, this isn't just entertainment. It's calibration. A story isn't just told. It's interpreted, argued about, reenacted by siblings until the meaning softens into shared memory. In fact, one of the drawings is now being turned into a game. 3 kids squat near the fire, moving pebbles around a spiral etched in the dirt. They argue over who gets to be the flute spirit and who's stuck being the silent fish. It's bedtime, but no one's sleeping yet. The night stories haven't finished weaving their work. Here's something delightfully odd. In Benin, some stories were meant to be unfinished. That was the point. They ended on a strange note, or a question, or a mystery, like the tale of the spirit who forgot her name, or the chief who could only speak on rainy Tuesdays, or the house that wouldn't open its door unless you knocked with the truth. You hear a version of that one tonight. It ends when a boy knocks with silence itself, and the door swings open. No moral given, just knowing nods, and a few chuckles from the elders. You lean back, gazing up at the stars now scattered like millet across the sky. Someone begins humming, low, circular, repetitive. It's not a song exactly, more like a punctuation mark. A cue. The children yawn. The goat has curled up on someone's foot. The fire's down to embers. The elder storyteller, her eyes catching the light, asks one last question. If you bury a word, does it grow into a story? You don't answer, but you know, this kingdom wasn't preserved in books or shouted across time. It was carried in gestures, rituals, songs, and silences that know when to wait, when to bend, when to root themselves in the dark. Even now, as the courtyard quiets and families retreat, you sense the stories haven't ended. They've just gone to sleep. And maybe that's what you'll do too. You head back through the narrow lanes. The silence is thicker now, but warm. Familiar. You understand it better. It's not the absence of sound. It's the presence of listening. The sky is almost pale now. Not quite morning, but drifting that way. You've stayed awake far longer than planned, but something in the hush of Benin's night makes you reluctant to close your eyes. You're not alone in this. Across the city, small figures move through their dawn duties with quiet devotion. Today, you're heading to a place few outsiders ever entered. Not because it was secret, but because it was sacred. The ancestral groves. Places where voices go to rest. Where memory has roots. Where silence isn't empty, it's occupied. The walk there is quiet. Your feet crunch lightly on red earth. You pass walls draped in moss, carved stone markers so weathered they seem like parts of the forest, not made by human hands. The air changes as you near. Cooler. Damp with early mist. You've crossed into a zone of reverence. There's no gate, just a wide stone embedded in the path, marking the threshold. Your guide stops, removes his sandals, and gestures for you to do the same. Bare feet on sacred ground. A reminder, nothing here is yours to claim. This is where Benin buried its dead, but not all of them. Not in the modern sense. These groves were for ancestors, not corpses. For presence, not absence. You step carefully beneath the canopy of old trees, their limbs bent like elbows in prayer. Around you, bundles of cloth hang from branches. Tokens. Some are faded to pale threads. Others gleam with recent dye. They sway gently, whispering nothing and everything. In a small clearing, a figure kneels before a carved post topped with a bird. Not a priest, just a granddaughter. Offering kola nuts and a quiet hum. You step back instinctively, not to intrude. The moment doesn't need you. You begin to see them then. Shrines, tucked between roots. Not grand tombs or mausoleums. Small earthen mounds, sometimes no more than a lump in the soil, ringed with shells or marked with a broken pot. Each one is a sentence. A name. A living whisper in the dirt. In Benin, ancestors weren't just remembered. They were consulted, called upon in ritual, invited to meals, even asked for advice through divination. It wasn't spooky. It was relational. They hadn't vanished. They'd simply shifted where they stood. There's a fringe theory, one that anthropologists debate with furrowed brows, that the spatial layout of the Benin capital mirrored ancestral cosmology. The palace, with its concentric courtyards and radial roads, wasn't just political architecture. It was a map of the spirit world. You glance up now and notice a tree carved with spirals. The spirals don't wrap around it. They radiate outward from the trunk, like ripples in a pond, or a life remembered in waves. Your guide picks up a handful of dust and tosses it gently onto a flat rock. You copy him. No word spoken. Later, he tells you, "That was a greeting. We say I see you to those who've seen more than we have." There's even a story about a hunter who came to the grove each morning to ask his grandfather which direction to track the leopard. Not once did he hear an answer, but he always found the trail. The silence points. If you know how to follow, the tale ends. You walk deeper still, past a shrine shaped like a tortoise shell. For patience, someone whispers, and another that's just an empty calabash turned upside down. That one's for a man who gave everything, your guide says. So now he holds nothing. You ask what happens when people forget. He shrugs. They don't. Then, softer, or if they do, the land remembers. You sit near one mound, shaped like a seated figure, half sunk in the soil. The silence here is different, denser, not ominous, just full, as if this quiet has seen everything and now simply waits. Here's something oddly beautiful. Some families leave small bells at their ancestors' mound, not to ring, but to be found. A child playing, a passerby pausing. Whoever finds the bell must stop, sit, and say the ancestor's name aloud. Just once. No praise, no prayer, just recognition. You find one yourself, half buried under leaves. You hold it gently in your palm. The name etched into its side reads, Adolo. You whisper it once. Nothing happens. Or maybe everything does. As you walk back toward the edge of the grove, you hear birdsong for the first time all morning. Faint, insistent, like the beginning of a new page. Your guide nods. They always come when it's time to go. You put your sandals back on. Dust your feet. Say nothing. Not because there's nothing to say, but because everything has already been said, by trees, by carved stones, by the way light filters down between branches. You look back once. The grove stands silent. But you hear it now, louder than before. By the time you're back in the heart of Benin City, the sun is up, but the streets haven't burst into full bustle yet. The city is still in that gentle middle state, awake, but not loud. Kind of like a person who stretches before they speak. Today, your guide says, you'll be walking the outer walls. Not the city's edge, those came later, but the older, sacred boundaries. The ones that once told the city where to stop and the kingdom where to begin. You follow the path that curves behind the palace quarter, through a thicket of old-growth trees and tangled vines. Then, rising out of the earth like a red wave, you see it, an enormous embankment, carved by human hands, worn smooth by centuries of rain and time. This is part of the Aya, the great earthwork system that once enclosed Benin in a complex web of ramparts, moats, and berms. Not just defensive fortifications, though they serve that too, but statements. Borders made of silence and sweat. You run your hand along the wall's sloped surface. It's not flat. It curves, gently, like the side of a massive bowl. Designed to absorb sound. Designed to listen. The remarkable part? These earthworks stretched for thousands of miles, forming one of the longest man-made structures in pre-colonial Africa, though few outside the continent ever hear about them. Historians still argue about the exact extent. Some say the Aya rivaled the Great Wall of China in scope. But unlike the Great Wall, this wasn't just a line. It was a weave. Each section of earth was built by communities, village by village, clan by clan, each responsible for a piece. The process wasn't just engineering. It was ritual. Before digging began, prayers were said. An offering was made. Sometimes the soil itself had to be spoken to, not commanded, asked. It's said that in certain seasons, when the wind hits the embankments just right, they sing. A low hum, like a memory humming through clay. You strain your ears. No song today, but you believe it. A small boy walks past, balancing a pot on his head. He skips along the base of the wall, tapping it lightly with a stick. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Your guide smiles. That's how kids play hide and seek here. The wall hides, they seek. Further along, you find an old marker stone, cracked but still standing, covered in shallow carvings, abstract patterns, not words. Someone tells you it once marked the spot where 3 clan territories met. They didn't draw lines, they placed symbols. So the border wasn't just a point on a map, it was a story. You ask how people knew where they could go, where they couldn't. Your guide shrugs. You just knew. In Benin, boundaries were not shouted. They were felt. Certain trees, certain patterns in the grass, the slope of the ground. They all signaled where one world ended and another began. You arrive at a sunken ditch lined with moss. Once it was a water moat. Now it holds silence. Your guide points to the other side. There, he says. That's where the messengers ran. Messengers? Yes. Before horses became widespread, messages between nobles or guilds were delivered on foot, fast and barefoot. The ditch trails became paths of knowledge. But here's the strange part. Many of those messengers never spoke. Even under pressure, they carried sticks instead. Not writing. Sticks. Each one shaped, shaved, or knotted in a specific way, a kind of tactile Morse code. The receiver would feel the stick, note the grooves, the direction of the taper, even the scent rubbed into the grain. A curve might mean urgent. A knot near the middle might signal not safe. A square end? Return quickly. A whole lexicon in timber. You're handed one such stick now, a reproduction, but faithful. You close your fingers around it. It's light, but meaningful. You run your thumb along its spine. A notch here, a twist there. You wonder if you could learn to read this language without words. Probably. Benin was built for that kind of learning. Along the wall, you find small footpaths worn into the berms, not made by traffic, but by ceremony. Women used to climb here in festival seasons, carrying offerings to the 4 cardinal points. Not because the gods needed direction, but because people did. One shrine sits at a crossroads where the wall meets a stream. It's made of stone and feathers. No priest in sight, just a quiet space. People still drop things here, small coins, dried fruit, poems written in charcoal on stones. This is what a border looks like in Benin. Not a wall of no. A place to pause, to ask, to listen. There's one more place your guide wants to show you. At the wall's farthest turn, beyond a patch of cassava fields, there's a stone bench shaped like an open book. It's a modern edition, carved decades ago, but the inscription is older. Where the earth ends, the voice begins. You sit on it, facing back toward the city. Smoke curls up from cooking fires. You can hear faint music somewhere. A thumb piano, maybe. Birds. The city's heartbeat. And you realize, these boundaries weren't meant to keep people out. They were built to protect the message. Every moat, every mound, every whisper of wind through the trees. It was never about what Benin kept away. It was about what it wanted to keep safe. There's a different kind of quiet now. You've passed through shrines, groves, workshops, guild halls, ancestral walls. You've sat in courtyards listening to silence do the work of 20 drums. You've seen stories etched in ivory, oaths forged in iron, and walls that hum when the wind is kind. But there's still one place left to visit before you sleep. The archive. Except in Benin, an archive isn't a building with shelves. It's a mind, a body, a memory, passed from lips to ears and hearts to hands, preserved not on paper, but in the rhythm of life. You're guided now to a modest home near the palace grounds. No gate, no plaque, just an open doorway and the sound of someone sweeping. The woman inside looks up, sees your guide, and nods. You've come to meet my mother, she says. The archivist. You expect a grand storyteller, maybe a priestess wrapped in coral, someone who booms wisdom like thunder. But no, she's small, quiet, seated on a mat beside a calabash bowl. Her fingers trace the edge of it, as if reading a story carved there. Sit, she says, gesturing beside her. And then, without preamble, she begins. You hear about a bronze plaque once held in the Oba's inner room. It showed 3 figures, one kneeling, one whispering, one listening. No labels, just postures. The woman says the plaque was lost during the British invasion. But not really, she adds. Because I remember it. She touches her temple, then her chest. Here, she says. Here too. You ask where she learned all this. Her grandmother, and her grandmother's grandmother. Some of it in words, some in lullabies, some in gestures passed down in silence during funerals and births. Benin's true archive, she explains, is redundancy. The same knowledge, packed into art, stories, ceremonies, hairstyles, even recipes. So even if one version is stolen or broken, she taps the calabash again. Another survives. This is the core of it, you realize. In a world where colonial invasion shattered so much, Benin's strength was not just its art, but the echoes inside it. The repetition. The way the same message could live in a coral bead and a bronze plaque and a story about a clever tortoise and a scar on someone's cheek. Redundancy was survival, and silence was storage. The archivist reaches for a small basket beside her mat. Inside are bundles, tied leaves, woven twine, tiny gourds. She lifts one, unties it, and spills out a set of small seeds. Castor seeds, she says. For warning. You raise your eyebrows. They taste sweet at first, she explains, but inside, poison. So we use them to remind the young. Don't trust what flatters first. A proverb in plant form. You ask if she worries these things will be forgotten. She smiles, but doesn't answer. Instead, she begins singing, not loudly, just a slow hum. the same rhythm as a lullaby you heard near the groves. A song that has no clear beginning, no neat ending. Just a loop, like a heartbeat remembering itself. You hum along. You don't know the words, but somehow you follow. The woman's daughter brings food, pounded yam, stew, fresh mango. It's a gentle offering, a continuation. You eat quietly, feeling the story settle into your limbs like warmth. As you rise to leave, the archivist hands you something, a small palm kernel carved with a spiral. It's not much, she says, but it listens. You thank her and step back out into the evening. The sky is a silver bruise, stars blinking into view. Around you, Benin begins to hush again, not into silence, but into that silence. The kind that's full of breath and meaning. The kind that knows what's been kept and what cannot be taken. You pass by the palace gates one last time, now dimmed by the blue of dusk. Somewhere, a drum taps once, then again, just like in the blacksmith's yard. A man passes, carrying a mirror wrapped in cloth. You remember what they said about mirrors. They don't just reflect. They store. Everything you've seen, the braided symbols, the oath blades, the rain axes, the laugh of the tortoise, the whisper at the shrine, the spiral on the palm kernel, it's all been leading here. To a simple truth. Benin didn't speak loudly. It didn't have to. Its silence spoke. And now, you carry some of it with you. Maybe not the language, not exactly, but the rhythm, the intention, the spiral of meaning woven into something as simple as a comb or a wall or the hush before a story begins. You close your eyes, and the silence folds around you like a well-worn cloak. Let it all soften now. Let the images drift backward, like tide leaving shore. Palace walls washed in ochre light, the quiet curve of a forge fire, the rustle of cloth near an ancestral grove. Let your breath deepen. No need to hold any of it too tightly. What needs to stay will. The voices are quiet now, but the message hums on. Through the trees, through the soil, through the stories whispered in sleep. You've traveled far tonight, through time, through silence, through a kingdom that carved meaning into everything it touched. And now, finally, the hush can settle into your bones. Slow your thoughts. Let them curl like smoke into stillness. You're safe here. The fire's low. The gate is closed. The story has ended, but the silence, that beautiful, careful silence, remains. And it will keep watch until morning.